So I wanted to sort of say, talk a little bit about, well, there she goes. Um, this is this coming Sunday is called Christ the King Sunday. And it is the final Sunday in the church year. The church year starts on the first Sunday of Advent, and it ends with Christ the King Sunday. And I find that really fascinating that we're talking about what we're going to be talking about today, just before Christ the King Sunday, because the last several Bible studies we've had the judges, and now we're talking about the kings, and the establishing of the kingship in Israel, according to Samuel, was that the people rejected the leadership of God, and they wanted a leadership, a human leader. So it's interesting to me that we happen to be talking about the kingship of people while we're coming into King Sunday. It's two separate kinds of kingship. You there?
I'm here, but
Your video froze.
yeah, and
Yeah.
I don't know what to do about it.
Well, you look very peaceful.
Oh, I go sleep.
It's okay. It may come back in a minute.
Okay, there's a thing down at the bottom that says stop video.
You can do that. You can stop video and restart it and see what happens.
Okay. It just sent me away.
Yep, now it started again.
Okay. Oh, that says stop. Dr. Camera. Video. Choose video.
Now it should be able to hit that same button.
I did. Oh, can you hear me?
We can hear you fine. We just can't see it. It's fine. We'll wait to see if it comes back. It may be that your internet is a little slow or something right now. So,
Okay.
so
Oops.
we
No,
are.
I lost you totally.
We can hear you.
I can't even see you.
Oh,
There we are. Oh, and Pat's back.
that's back.
Okay.
So we're talking about kingship. Now Saul is the first king, but remember that what I just said, that the past few chapters, the kingship was established because the people didn't want to listen to God, and they'd rather listen to man, which I think is really interesting when we talk about what leadership is all about. Especially just after a election, interesting that the idea of the kingship was established because people didn't want to listen to God. So we're in chapter 13 of 1 Samuel. I don't know what's going to go on with Pat here, but I can see her. Saul was blank years old. The blank is really a blank. When he began to reign, he reigned blank and 2 years over Israel. Saul chose.
Mine says 30.
30. I think they had to have guessed.
30, yeah, my book.
It says the number is lacking in the Hebrew text and the verse is lacking in the Septuagint. So I don't know what source they came up with in your. Saul chose 300,000 or 3,000 out of Israel. 2,000 were with Saul in Michmash and the hill country of Bethel, and 1,000 were with Jonathan in Gibeah of Benjamin. The rest of the people he sent home to their tents. Jonathan defeated the garrison of the Philistines that was at Gibeah, and the Philistines heard of it. And Saul blew the trumpet throughout all the land, saying, "Let the Hebrews hear." When all Israel heard that Saul had defeated the garrison of the Philistines, and also that Israel had become odious to the Philistines, I like that word, odious, the people were called out to join Saul at Gilgal. The Philistines mustered to fight with Israel 30,000 chariots and 6,000 horsemen, and troops like sand on the seashore in multitude. They came up and encamped at Michmash, to the east of Bethaven. When the Israelites saw that they were in distress, for the troops were hard pressed, the people hid themselves in caves and in holes and in rocks and in tombs and in cisterns. Interesting. Some Hebrews crossed the Jordan to the land of Gad and Gilead. Saul was still at Gilgal, and all the people followed him trembling. I find that kind of interesting when the other times they fought, but this time rather than, they're outnumbered, so they hid themselves even in cisterns and in wells.
Yeah, yeah.
I find kind of funny. So Saul waited 7 days, the time appointed by Samuel, but Samuel did not come to Gilgal, and the people began to slip away from Saul. So Saul said, "Bring the burnt offering here to me and the offerings of well-being." And he offered the burnt offering. As soon as he had finished offering the burnt offering, Samuel arrived, and Saul went out to meet him and salute him. Samuel said, "What have you done?" Saul replied, "When I saw that the people were slipping away from me, and that you did not come within the days appointed, and that the Philistines were mustering at Michmash, I said, now the Philistines will come down upon me at Gilgal, and I have not entreated the favor of the Lord. So I forced myself and offered the burnt offering." Samuel said to Saul, "You have done foolishly. You have not kept the commandment of the Lord your God, which he commanded you. The Lord would have established your kingdom over Israel forever, but now your kingdom will not continue. The Lord has sought out a man after his own heart, and the Lord has appointed him to be ruler over his people, because you have not kept what the Lord commanded you." And Samuel left and went on his way from Gilgal. The rest of the people followed Saul to join the army. They went up from Gilgal towards Gibeah of Benjamin. So what's going on here? He is not supposed, the sort of disobedience is he's not a prophet or a priest, and so he's not technically supposed to bless it'd be like doing communion without a pastor there. That's kind of he decided to just go ahead and do it because he wanted God's blessing. And then Samuel arrived just after the fact, says, "I'm here to do it for you," and it's already been done. So Samuel says, so the very first act of Saul as a leader of the people is to do something wrong. And partly because of that, he says, "You're not the leader for us. You're going to be deposed by someone who God is after God's own heart," which will happen in just a few chapters. It always seems, I have to say, reading these history books, it always seems like they're outnumbered and outgunned. That the enemy has more soldiers and better. When you see they have that many chariots, how many thousands of chariots do they have? Too many. 30,000 chariots and 6,000 horsemen. Troops like the sand on the seashore in multitude. And he had like 6,000 total. Right. It always seems like they're outnumbered and outdone. Hi, Betty Lou. I saw you joined us too. And now we lost Judy. Boy, we're having an interesting technological problem today. Betty Lou, can you hear us? No. Okay, I'll keep talking. Second half of chapter 13. Saul counted the people who were present with him, about 600 men. So what I just read, 6,000 horsemen, 30,000 chariots, and troops like the sand of the seashore in multitude. And he's got 600 men. We'll talk about being outnumbered. Saul, his son Jonathan, and the people who were present with them, stayed in Geba of Benjamin, but the Philistines encamped at Michmash. And raiders came out of the camp of the Philistines in 3 companies. One company turned toward Orphra to the land of Shual. Another company turned toward Beth Horon. Another company turned toward the mountain that looks down upon the valley of Zeboim toward the wilderness. Now there was no smith to be found throughout all the land of Israel, for the Philistines said, the Hebrews must not make swords or spears for themselves. So all the Israelites went down to the Philistines to sharpen their plowshares, mattocks, axes, or sickles. The charge was 2/3 of the shekel for the plowshares and for the mattocks, and 1/3 of the shekel for the sharpening of axes and the setting of the goads. So on the day of the battle, neither sword nor spear was to be found in the possession of any of the people with Saul and Jonathan, but Saul and his son Jonathan had them. I find that kind of fascinating. They're not allowed to sharpen weapons, so they go to the enemy towns to have their weapons sharpened. That's they went down to the Philistines to sharpen their weapons, but they're against the Philistines. So, okay, they had no smith themselves. Interesting. Pat and Betty Lou, can you hear us? Can you hear? Wave if you can hear.
Yeah, good morning. Yeah, this is my B12 shot
I-
day.
What's that,
I
Pat?
couldn't get the audio start. I couldn't get the audio on to start with, but I can hear you now.
Okay, good. I wasn't sure. I saw you both. I wasn't sure if we were all together here. So, as I said, this is one of those times where the people are vastly outnumbered. And now they don't even have weapons because they're all getting sharpened. Why they got them all sharpened on the same day by the enemy is interesting. But on the day of the battle, all the weapons were in the Philistine towns being sharpened. Is one of those where, well, you can see the title of the next section, where God's going to be on their side and provide another miracle. It still seems a little bit, when we read when it first came into the land, they, all of the land was theirs, but the Philistines never went away. And the Philistines still haven't gone away. It's the Palestinians of today. So it's interesting that this fight is still happening. That these battles that we're reading now are still happening. Now a garrison of the Philistines had gone out to the pass of Michmash. One day Jonathan, son of Saul, said to the young man who carried his armor, "Come, let us go over to the Philistine garrison on the other side." But he did not tell his father. Saul was staying in the outskirts of Gibeah under the pomegranate tree that is at Migron. The troops that were with him were about 600 men, along with Ahiah, son of Ahitub, Ichabod's brother, son of Phinehas, son of Eli, the priest of the Lord of Shiloh, carrying an ephod. Now the people did not know that Jonathan had gone. In the pass by which Jonathan tried to go over to the Philistine garrison, there was a rocky crag on one side and a rocky crag on the other. The name of the one was Bozez, and the name of the other Seneh. The crag rose on the north in front of the Michmash, and on the other on the south in front of Geba. Jonathan said to the young man who carried his armor, "Come, let us go over to the garrison of these uncircumcised. It may be that the Lord will act for us, for nothing can hinder the Lord from saving by many or by few." His armor bearer said to him, "Do all that your mind inclines to. I am with you, as your mind is, so is mine." Then Jonathan said, we will cross over to those men, and we will show ourselves to them. If they say to us, wait until we come to you, then we will stand still in our place, and we will not go up to them. But if they say, come up to us, then we will go up, for the Lord has given them into our hand. That will be the sign for us. So both of them showed themselves to the garrison of the Philistines, and the Philistines said, look, Hebrews are coming out of the hold where they have hidden themselves. The men of the garrison hailed Jonathan and his armor bearer, saying, come up to us and we will show you something. Jonathan said to his armor bearer, come up after me, for the Lord has given them into the hand of Israel. Then Jonathan climbed up on his hands and feet, with his armor bearer following after him. The Philistines fell before Jonathan and his armor bearer coming after him. And his armor bearer coming after him killed them. I'm not really sure. hard to tell how many, what's going on here. Passman. There's no, I don't see any hint. I don't, it just sort of says they all died. I'm like, okay, so how'd that work? In that first slaughter, Jonathan and his armor bearer killed about 20 men within an area of about half a furrow long and an acre of land. There was a panic in the camp, in the field, and among all the people. The garrison and even the raiders trembled. The earth quaked and it became a very great panic. Kind of interesting. Like the Philistines felt like they had the upper hand, and then he comes up and kills them, but there's no details. Anyway, Saul's lookouts in Gibeah, Benjamin, were watching as the multitude was surging back and forth. Then Saul said to the troops who were with him, "Call the roll and see who has gone from us." When they had called the roll, Jonathan and his armor bearer were not there. Saul said to Ahijah, "Bring the ark of God here," for at that time the ark of God went with the Israelites. While Saul was talking to the priest, the tumult in the camp of the Philistines increased more and more. And Saul said to the priest, "Withdraw your hand." Then Saul and all the people who were with him rallied and went into the battle, and every sword was against the other, so that there was very great confusion. Now the Hebrews who previously had been with the Philistines and had gone up with them into the camp turned and joined the Israelites who were with Saul and Jonathan. Likewise, when all the Israelites who had gone into hiding in the hill country of Ephraim heard that the Philistines were fleeing, they too followed closely after them in battle. So the Lord gave Israel the victory that day. The battle passed beyond Bethaven, and the troops of Saul numbered altogether about 10,000 men. The battle spread out over the hill country of Ephraim. So basically, Jonathan sparked this with his little skirmish. He made everybody very confused and panicked. And all these people that were not joining in with Saul ended up joining in with Saul. And instead of having 600, there ended up being 10,000 that chased the Philistines away. In my Bible, this is one of the places where there's a map referring to this time period, and this is all in the southern kingdom area near where Jerusalem will be established, in that area. So it's a long chapter. Chapter 14 is a long chapter.
Yes.
Now Saul committed a very rash act on that day. He had laid an oath on the troops, saying, "Cursed be anyone who eats food before it is evening, and I have been avenged on my enemies." So none of the troops tasted food. All the troops came upon a honeycomb, and there was honey on the ground. When the troops came upon the honeycomb, the honey was dripping out, but they did not put their hands to their mouths, for they feared the oath. But Jonathan had not heard his father charge the troops with the oath. So he extended the staff that was in his hand. He dipped the tip of it in the honeycomb, and he put his hand to his mouth, and his eyes brightened. Then one of the soldiers said, "Your father strictly charged the troops with an oath, saying, 'Cursed be anyone who eats food this day.' And so the troops are faint." Then Jonathan said, "My father has troubled the land. See how my eyes have brightened because I tasted a little of his honey. How much better if today the troops had eaten freely of the spoil taken from their enemies. For now the slaughter among the Philistines has not been great." They're not allowed to eat. Not sure why he said that, but they weren't allowed to eat. The troops were not allowed to eat until at some later point.
Doesn't sound like a very smart thing to tell them.
No. And after they had struck down the Philistines that day from Michmash to Ajalon, the troops were very faint. So the troops flew upon the spoil and took sheep and oxen and calves and slaughtered them on the ground, and the troops ate them with the blood. Then it was reported to Saul, "Look, the troops are sinning against the Lord by eating with the blood." And he said, "You have dealt treacherously. Roll a large stone before me here." Saul said, "Disperse yourselves among the troops and say to them, let all bring their oxen or their sheep and slaughter them here and eat. and do not sin against the Lord by eating with the blood. I'm not sure what eating with the blood is supposed
Yeah.
to. Let me see if there's a reference here. No, it says it's just sort of a side story. Oh, here we go. When the victory is assured, Saul's oath is no longer effective. The famished troops slaughtered captured livestock for food, but they sinned by eating the meat with the blood, which was reserved for the deity, therefore violating the prohibition recorded. Yeah, you're supposed to, okay, so you're supposed to let the blood drain out of the animal before you eat it. That was part of their ritual sacrifice. So that must have been what it is. They didn't wait for the blood to drain out of the animal before they cooked it. So all the troops brought their oxen with them that night and slaughtered them there. And Saul built an altar to the Lord. It was the first altar that he built to the Lord. Okay. Jonathan in danger of death. Any thoughts on that so far?
It doesn't make any sense to me to even study this because I don't understand what it's trying to tell me, other than that there was a battle and
Yeah, I think I think part of what we're talking about here is in the previous, like I said earlier, in the previous chapters, the people are coming to prophets to say, well, what does God want us to do?
yeah.
And now they're not listening to God, they're listening to leaders who are making a variety of mistakes.
Okay.
But beyond that, I don't know if, I mean, remember, this is history. These are the history books. So it's almost more, it may not always be, I don't know, something that pertains too much to what we, to us, right? Because it's talking about what happened in the past. I do feel like it tends to feel a little repetitive because they're always fighting the Philistines and they're always fighting each other. And there'll be more of it. As we go through. So yeah, I don't know what there is to learn. You're right. There's not a whole lot to learn here. They're fighting, okay. And God is with them. I mean, there's that. Again, they were outnumbered, and again, they found a way to survive and win. That tends to happen a lot for them. So verse 36. Then Saul said, let us go down after the Philistines by night and despoil them until the morning light. Let us not leave one of them. They said, do whatever seems good to you. But the priest said, let us draw near to God here. So Saul inquired of God, shall I go down after the Philistines? Will you give them into the hands of Israel? But he did not answer him that day. Saul said, come here, all you leaders of the people, and let us find out how this sin has arisen today. For the Lord lives, who saves Israel, even if it is my son Jonathan, he shall surely die. But there was no one among all the people who answered him. He said to all Israel, you shall be on one side, and I and my son Jonathan will be on the other side. The people said to Saul, do what seems good to you. Then Saul said, O Lord God of Israel, why have you not answered your servant today? If this guilt is in me or my son Jonathan, O Lord God of Israel, give Urim. But if this guilt is in your people Israel, give Thummim. I don't know what Urim and Thummim are.
Yeah.
Let's see, 41. Urim and Thummim, the names of the objects cast in the lottery, probably dice or something similar, inscribed to the first letter of each name. So they're rolling dice to see whose fault it is, the people or Saul and Jonathan. It's interesting. That's not the first time we've seen that, where they've thrown lots to decide what God's will was. They didn't hear God's voice, so they said, well, we'll roll dice, and whoever it falls on, that's whose fault it is. That's who God is not happy with. It's interesting. What if church involved rolling dice? What if on Sunday morning that was part of our church?
I'm glad it's not. I'd have a hard time keeping on.
Right.
There. Yeah,
Right. It's just interesting that's not the first time we've seen that, right?
yeah.
So Saul said, cast the lot between me and my son Jonathan, and Jonathan was taken. So Jonathan and Saul were indicated by the dice, and the people were cleared. And then Saul says, all right, who is it, me or my son? And Jonathan was taken. So it's all Jonathan's fault, apparently. Saul's son. Then Saul said to Jonathan, tell me what you have done. Jonathan told him, I tasted a little honey with the tip of the staff that was in my hand. Here I am, I will die. Saul said, God do so to me and more also. You shall surely die, Jonathan. Then the people said to Saul, shall Jonathan die who has accomplished this great victory in Israel? Far from it. As the Lord lives, not one hair of his head shall fall to the ground, for he has worked with God today. So the people ransomed Jonathan, and he did not die. Then Saul withdrew from pursuing the Philistines, and the Philistines went to their own place. So basically he's saying they won because of God's favor, but then, and that was through Jonathan's thing, but then Jonathan broke the rule that God had set forth. And so they said, well, hold on, how is that fair? You know, he took the honey when he wasn't supposed to, but he wasn't around to know. And he was the one that won the battle for us in the first place with God's help. So shouldn't that cancel itself out or something, you know? And then he did not die. I don't personally feel like that's how God's economy works.
No, it doesn't sound like God.
I do something bad, so I do something good, and it cancels it out. That's not how I see God's economy, but interesting. Anyway, when Saul had taken the kingship over Israel, he fought against all his enemies on every side. So it's sort of a fast forward here. Against Moab, against the Ammonites, against Edom, against the kings of Zobah, and against the Philistines. Wherever he turned, he routed them. He did valiantly and struck down the Amalekites and rescued Israel out of the hands of those who plundered them. Now the sons of Saul were Jonathan, Ishvi, and Malchishua. And the names of his two daughters were these. The name of the firstborn was Merab, and the name of the younger Mishal. The name of Saul's wife was Ahinoam, daughter of Ahimaaz. And the name of the commander of his army was Abner, son of Ner, Saul's uncle. Kish was the father of Saul, and Ner the father of Abner, who was the son of Abiel. So it's kind of putting Saul in where, because you didn't necessarily know who he was related to, and that was important. There was hard fighting against the Philistines all the days of Saul, and when Saul saw any strong or valiant warrior, he took him into his service. So essentially, this chapter has established Saul. At the beginning of this one chapter, Saul was maybe anointed, but not the king. And he only had a few soldiers with him. And thanks to his son and the people helping rise up, Saul is sort of cemented as the king, as the leader by the end of this chapter. I feel like that last section, like a lot of time passed in that last, because fighting lots of different over his reign. Who knows how many years that was. Yeah. So this is the establishment of the kingship. And we'll go a little bit further. We'll do chapter 15. I thought, I have to look back here for a second, because I thought Samuel didn't we have sort of an epilogue for Samuel that Samuel was, he said goodbye and he stopped ruling, he stopped being the prophet for the people, but he's still around, apparently. Because we've already seen him in this chapter.
But then the people had rejected him because they wanted a king.
Right. Right. It's such an interesting kind of thing. So there's this sort of theological theory. It's called two kingdoms theory. And this is, we live with one foot in each kingdom. We live in God's kingdom, we live in the kingdom of the world.
Mhm.
And sometimes the rules are different in those two kingdoms. And so the rules and who we are and how we're supposed to live are different in the two kingdoms. So while this isn't that, it feels a little like that. Like there's Samuel is sort of the leader of God's kingdom, and then Saul is the other. Even at the time of this, the line of kings still exists. You know, we remember the Herod, right? Herod is there was a line of kings that were the Herods. At the time of Jesus, you have the Herods, but you have three different types of power. You have the Herods, which are the kings, and they're rulers in name alone, really. I mean, they don't have really any power, but they're the king. Then you have the temple, and the temple was where, you know, people went to for disputes. They were the judges of the day, right? They went there, of course, to worship and to pray. But also, if you have a dispute with someone, if someone stole something from you, you went to the temple and they decided what was going to happen. And then, of course, you have the Romans over everybody. So you have kind of, with the Herods and the temple, the two kingdoms going on much later on, right? You have the rule by God, which is the temple, and the rule by man, which is the Herods. Even though the Herods still were, you know, went to the temple and prayed and all that, and the temple was kind of corrupt in many ways. It still is this sort of two kingdoms living in both reigns at the same time. So this sort of established that. So we're in the beginning of chapter 15. Samuel said to Saul, "The Lord sent me to anoint you king over his people Israel. Now therefore listen to the words of the Lord. Thus says Lord of hosts, I will punish the Amalekites for what they did in opposing Israelites when they came up out of Egypt. Now go and attack Amalek." We've already heard about his victory over them. This is more of an expanding on that. And utterly destroy all that they have. Do not spare them, but kill both man and woman, child and infant, ox and sheep, camel and donkey. That's sort of sad.
Yeah.
So Saul summoned the people and numbered them in Telaim, 200,000 foot soldiers and 10,000 soldiers of Judah. Saul came to the city of the Amalekites and lay in wait in the valley. Saul said to the Kenites, "Go, leave, withdraw from among the Amalekites." I don't know who the Kenites are, a different group of people. Kenites, desert dwelling nomadic metal workers or smiths who had settled along the Amalekites. Okay. I will destroy you with them, for you showed kindness to all the people of Israel when they came up out of Egypt. So the Kenites withdrew from the Amalekites, and Saul defeated the Amalekites from Havilah as far as Shur, which is east of Egypt. He took King Agag of the Amalekites alive, but utterly destroyed all the people with the edge of the sword. Saul and the people spared Agag and the best of the sheep and of the cattle and of the fatlings and the lambs and all that was valuable, did not utterly destroy them. All that was despised and worthless, they utterly destroyed. So what did God say? It was God who said that, right? Go and attack. Don't leave anything. Don't leave man, woman, child, ox, sheep, camel, or donkey. Destroy everything. Then they spared the king, and they kept the good meat.
Well,
They kept the best of the sheep and of the cattle in that verse 9 there, and the fatlings and the lambs, all that was valuable, and they would not destroy them. Boy, they just keep disobeying God. I tell you what. So the word of the Lord came to Samuel. I regret that I made Saul king. He's only barely been anointed. And Samuel hears from God, I regret that I made Saul king, for he has turned back from following me and has not carried out my commands. Samuel was angry and he cried out to the Lord all night. Samuel rose early in the morning to meet Saul. And Samuel was told Saul went to Carmel, where he set up a monument for himself. And on returning, he passed on down to Gilgal. When Samuel came to Saul, Saul said to him, May you be blessed by the Lord. I have carried out the command of the Lord. But Samuel said, What then is this bleating of sheep in my ears and the lowing of camels that I hear?
Caught.
He's caught red-handed.
Yep.
Saul said, They have been brought them from the Amalekites, for the people spared the best of the sheep and the cattle to sacrifice to the Lord your God, but the rest we have utterly destroyed. Then Samuel said to Saul, Stop, I will tell you what the Lord said to me last night. He replied, Speak. Samuel said, Though you are little in your own eyes, are you not head of the tribes of Israel? The Lord anointed you king over Israel, and the Lord sent you on a mission and said, Go utterly destroy the sinners, the Amalekites, and fight against them until they are consumed. Why then did you not obey the voice of the Lord? Why did you swoop down on the spoil and do what was evil in the sight of the Lord? Saul said to Samuel, I have obeyed the voice of the Lord. I have gone on the mission which the Lord sent me. I have brought Agag, the king of Amalek, and I have utterly destroyed the Amalekites. But from the spoil, the people took sheep and cattle, the best of the things devoted to destruction, sacrifice the Lord your God in Gilgal. And Samuel said, Has the Lord as great delight in burnt offerings and sacrifices, and is as in obedience to the voice of the Lord? Surely to obey is better than sacrifice, and to heed than the fat of rams. For rebellion is no less a sin than divination, and stubbornness is like iniquity and idolatry. Because you have rejected the word of the Lord, he also has rejected you from being king. Wow. So this is the reason it's indented, at least in my Bible, it's indented, is it's actually poetic.
Mhm.
In the Hebrew, it's poetic. It was written as a poem.
But there's one thought I noticed in there that too, that is echoed all the way through the Old Testament and the New Testament. In that it does the Lord delight in burnt offerings and sacrifices as much as in obeying the voice of the Lord.
Right. And later
Yeah.
on, because you have rejected the word of the Lord, we hear that a lot.
Yes.
Yeah. So Saul said to Samuel, I have sinned, for I have transgressed the commandment of the Lord and your words, because I feared the people and obeyed their voice. Therefore I pray, pardon my sin and return with me, so that I may worship the Lord. Samuel said to Saul, I will not return with you, for you have rejected the word of the Lord, and the Lord has rejected you from being king over Israel. As Samuel turned to go away, Saul caught the hem of his robe, and it tore. And Samuel said to him, The Lord has torn the kingdom of Israel from you this very day, and has given it to a neighbor of yours who is better than you. Moreover, the glory of Israel will not recant or change his mind, for he is not immortal, that he should change his mind. Then Saul said, I have sinned, yet honor me now before the elders of my people and before Israel, and return with me so that I may worship the Lord your God. So Samuel turned back after Saul, and Saul worshiped the Lord. Then Samuel said, Bring Agag, king of the Amalekites, here to me. And Agag came to him haltingly. Agag said, Surely this is the bitterness of death. But Samuel said, As your sword has made women childless, so your mother shall be childless among women. And Samuel hewed Agag in pieces before the Lord in Gilgal. Wow. Then Samuel went to Ramah, and Saul went up to his house in Gibeah of Saul. Samuel did not see Saul again until the day of his death. But Samuel grieved over Saul, and the Lord was sorry that he had made Saul king over Israel. We'll see that a lot too, which is interesting. that the Lord anoints different leaders and then often says, oh, I made a mistake anointing that one. That's not the only time we'll hear that. Even with David, even though David was beloved, there's points in the story of David, which we're going to go into in the future, where the Lord is disappointed with David. As perhaps the Lord is sometimes disappointed with us.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I think we'll stop here a little early because I kind of want to go in and start the section of David separately. I guess we could do one more. Doesn't really talk much about David, as much about David. We'll do one more chapter. We got a little bit of time. The Lord said to Samuel, how long will you grieve over Saul? I have rejected him from being king over Israel. Fill your horn with oil and set out. I will send you to Jesse the Bethlehemite, for I have provided for myself a king among his sons. So remember, the line of kings comes from where? Where did Jesus go? Where was Jesus born?
Bethlehem.
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 And he was born in Bethlehem because that's the city of kings. That's the city of the line of kings.
Right.
So here we see at the very beginning that the line of kings was going to come from Jesse the Bethlehemite. So as in the one from Bethlehem in the north. So they're in the south right now, they're in the north. Verse 2, Samuel said, how can I go? If Saul hears of it, he will kill me. And the Lord said, take a heifer with you and say, I have come to sacrifice to the Lord. Invite Jesse to the sacrifice, and I will show you what you shall do. And you shall anoint for me the one whom I name to you. I want to go back just a second too, because remember, Samuel's already told Saul, the Lord is displeased with you, and you're not the king anymore. But does Saul have to listen to Samuel? He doesn't.
No, he doesn't have any power.
Right? As far as Saul's concerned, okay, I broke God's law, but God's rule, but I'm still the king. Nobody can change that. It's not like Samuel has any power in that sense. But Samuel's going to anoint a different king, and then there will be a struggle between this new anointed king, David. So verse 3 again, invite Jesse to the sacrifice, and I will show you what you shall do, and you shall anoint for me the one whom I name to you. Samuel did what the Lord commanded and came to Bethlehem. The elders of the city came to meet him trembling and said, do you come peaceably? He said, peaceably, I have come to sacrifice to the Lord. Sanctify yourselves and come with me to the sacrifice. And he sanctified Jesse and his sons and invited them to the sacrifice. When they came, he looked on Eliab and thought, surely the Lord's anointed is now before the Lord. This is the story. This part of the story, by the way, we hear in our lectionary, which I kind of love. It reminds me a little bit of the story of Joseph, right? With the youngest, the smallest of the boys, right? Is the one that's the anointed one. But the Lord said to Samuel, do not look on his appearance or on the height of his stature, because I have rejected him. For the Lord does not see as mortals see. They look on the outward appearance. The Lord looks on the heart. Then Jesse called Abinadab and made him pass before Samuel. He said, neither has the Lord chosen this one. Then Jesse made Shammah pass by, and he said, neither has the Lord chosen this one. Jesse made 7 of his sons pass before Samuel, and Samuel said to Jesse, the Lord has not chosen any of these. Samuel said to Jesse, are all your sons here? And he said, there remains yet the youngest, but he is keeping the sheep. And Samuel said to Jesse, send and bring him, for we will not sit down until he comes here. He sent and brought him in. Now he was ruddy and had beautiful eyes and was handsome. The Lord said, rise and anoint him, for this is the one. Then Samuel took the horn of oil and anointed him in the presence of his brothers. And the Spirit of the Lord came mightily upon David from that day forward. Samuel then set out and went to Ramah. So this is the story that we hear once every 3 years about how David was chosen. And now I just before I'm going to continue with the rest of this chapter, but remember that, like I just said, Saul still considers himself to be the king, even though Samuel said, "You're not going to be the king any longer. I'm going to anoint somebody else." So, starting in this next little section, for a few chapters, we have this really interesting relationship between Saul and David. The majority of the rest of the kings either were deposed by war, or it was the children of the other king. And this relationship between David and Saul is really interesting because it's neither of those things for the most part. There is a battle at one point, but there's a lot more at play. So it's an interesting kind of relationship to think about, that the one who was anointed and the one that is anointed, and how they sort of interact with each other. Now the Spirit of the Lord departed from Saul, and an evil spirit from the Lord tormented him. And Saul's servants said to him, "See, now an evil spirit from God is tormenting you." Sometimes when you see something like that, where an evil spirit torments them, it's actually an illness of some sort has come upon them, but they blame it on spirits.
Mhm.
So it doesn't say in my Bible what it is, but I wonder if that might be part of the thing. Let our verse 16, let our Lord now command the servant to attend you to look for someone who is skillful in playing the lyre. And when the evil spirit from God is upon you, he will play it and you will feel better. So Saul said to his servants, "Provide for me someone who can play well and bring him to me." One of the young men answered, "I have seen a son of Jesse the Bethlehemite, who is skillful in playing, a man of valor, a warrior, prudent in speech, and a man of good presence, and the Lord is with him." So Saul sent messengers to Jesse and said, "Send me your son David, who is with the sheep." Jesse took a donkey loaded with bread, a skin of wine, and a kid, and sent them by his son David to Saul. And David came to Saul and entered his service. Saul loved him greatly, and he became his armor bearer. So David is serving Saul, right? David is becoming kind of a right-hand man. The armor bearer, like we saw with Jonathan in the previous chapter, is kind of the attendant, the right-hand helper, right? I don't know why I just thought of Romeo and Juliet. You know how Juliet's attendant is a big part in that story, because she's always with Juliet, helping her get ready, helping her get dressed, giving her advice, that sort of thing. That's sort of this role of armor bearer. Saul sent to Jesse saying, "Let David remain in my service, for he has found favor in my sight." And whenever the evil spirit from God came upon Saul, David took the lyre and played it with his hand, and Saul would be relieved and feel better, and the evil spirit would depart from him. So we see, and we're going to go into David and Goliath in the next chapter, and you'll still see, even in the story of David, Saul's still in the story, right? I think we forgot that even the story of David and Goliath, Saul's part of that story, and eventually Saul will not be. There's a the Lutheran handbook. I think I have a copy of it here. Maybe I do. Yeah. So this Lutheran handbook, which I usually give to people when we do confirmation or new members classes, that kind of thing. I know I gave Betty Lee one. There's some interesting stuff like comparative denominations, comparative religions, stuff like that. But there's also silly stories, like the funniest stories of the Bible, the top 10 Bible villains, and the grossest story of the Bible. And, there's a story that we'll read later. This is sort of a teaser. One of those that they call one of the grossest stories in the Bible is coming up, and it relates with Saul and David. Saul is defeated by David partly because David proves that he could have killed Saul at any point. And the way he proves that at one point is Saul is relieving himself in a cave, meaning going to the bathroom. And David was hiding in that same cave, and David cuts a section of his cloak, of Saul's cloak off to say, I could have killed you, but I saved you. And so they say it's one of the grossest stories in the Bible because it's someone going to the bathroom. But it's interesting. Like I said, it's really interesting to see. It's not just Saul's leadership or the mistakes he makes or how blessed David is, but kind of the interaction between the two of them, because David serves Saul.
Yeah.
David's going to serve Saul for another couple chapters, but David's already been anointed king by Samuel. Being anointed king doesn't mean you're the king. It means you will be the king.
Yeah.
God has said you're going to be the king. So it doesn't mean you're the king yet. So it's just interesting. Interactions between Saul and David are going to be interesting. So let's close in prayer and then call it a day.
Okay.
Dear Lord, thank you for letting us consider leadership. Leadership by God's will, God's hand, and leadership by human hand. And thank you for showing us the difference, this idea of two kingdoms, how difficult it is for us to live with one foot in each kingdom, in the kingdom of God and the kingdom of the world, especially when those two kingdoms are sometimes at odds with each other. Thank you for these stories that we read that remind us of your promise to always love and be with your people. In all this name we pray. Amen.
Amen.
Okay, Dan, I have a question,
Uh-huh.
and that is, if the Palestinians today are Muslims and they are descended from the Philistines, when did they actually become or embrace the Muslim religion?
I wouldn't use the broad brush that Palestinians are Muslims. There's quite a few Palestinian Christians, for instance.
Oh,
Being Palestinian does not mean you're Muslim. Just like being an American does not mean you're a Christian. You could be, like a Palestinian
Okay.
is a nation. So I would say they're majority Muslim, but there's Palestinian Christian churches. So quite a few of them actually. So yeah, the history is interesting. I mean, the history is here. There's more history about the Palestinians here in the Bible, the back history than in other places. And remember, Islam doesn't really take root as an actual faith tradition for a few hundred years after Christ. So,
I'm not even sure what Muslims' faith is. What is their basic belief?
they're actually surprisingly similar to ours in a lot of ways. They're Abrahamic. So that means in our own Bible we hear the story of Abraham sending Ishmael and his mother away,
Yeah.
and that's the precursor of the Islamic faith. They had a prophet, the prophet Muhammad, and I don't know, I didn't study it much. I mean, I studied world religions in the broad sense.
Mhm.
A lot of the teachings are actually very similar. There's a lot of, and then they also have incorporated what is our Torah is in the Quran.
Mm.
So a lot of the history and the teachings are very similar. We assume that they're totally different, but there are some cultural similarities for sure, and some teaching similarities. We assume, like a lot of people who don't know will say, well, they're all about violence, and I'm like, well, you could read parts of the Bible and say we're all about
Yeah. Yeah.
are we all about joy when we read about war? And there are people that even take Jesus' words about take up your sword and say, well, that means Jesus wants us to fight against our enemies. You know, like, well, you have to be careful how you pick and choose scripture, whether you're a Christian or a Muslim. The broad strokes are love your enemy, take care of each other, you know, that kind of thing, you know, treat each other as you would like to be treated in Islam too. But there's extremists in any faith
Yeah.
that take the pieces that they want to take and blow it out of proportion. So I totally forgot what your original question was now, Betty Lou.
The pardon?
I totally forgot what your original question was now.
Well, it's just, I was just wondering where the Palestinians embraced the Muslim religion. Of course, I know that it began back clear with Abraham and back that's the earliest trace of it.
Yeah, and remember that
But when did it become?
I'm gonna very much disappoint a couple of my professors, because I studied some of that, and I'm trying to see if I have a copy of one of those books here. Jerusalem becomes one of the holy cities, or one of the holiest cities, not just for the Jewish people and the Christianity, but also for Islam.
Mhm.
And some of that ties back to Abraham, and some of that ties back to history, that things that happen much after the Bible canon is decided. But Jerusalem is, yeah. So, and partly I think that's because a lot of the early Muslims were not necessarily in Israel, although the Philistines were, but in that general vicinity, and that was the holy city that was tied to them. So yeah, there's a lot, but no, there are definitely Palestinian Christians. There's a Christian Palestinian church in Bethlehem, and in Bethlehem, and they put up a 40-foot wall between the Palestinian section and the Jewish section, and separated out the Jewish areas from the Palestinian sections, and that Palestinian section contains that church, that Christian church. So yeah, it's always a more complicated fight, disagreement than people realize.
Oh, yeah.
There.
Well, I noticed that in their latest election, about how many different factions were elected to their government there,
Yeah.
and all of the dissension or disagreement over.
Well, I honestly think a lot of the fighting comes from the first time they came into the promised land. They said, "This is our land." Imagine if, you know, someone walked into the church on Sunday morning and said, "This is our church. God said this is our church. You all get out."
Well, we did it here too when the Europeans came over and started pushing the
Exactly.
Native Americans away.
And even if it is God's will, humans took that to mean not to live in harmony with each other, but to eliminate those that were there before them.
Yeah.
And that's a sad part of the story, and that's still sort of regardless of how you feel about the issues in Israel, that's still kind of the attitude that this is our house, get out. But they've been saying that for 4,000 years.
Yeah. Okay.
So have a good rest of your day. Of course,
right.
we won't have Bible study next week, because I will be driving up for Thanksgiving after delivering bags here in town. So we'll take it up again the week after Thanksgiving.
Well, have a wonderful
Okay.
Thanksgiving.